Hey guys, Pieguyrulz here, and welcome to Spongy Bits, where I take some episode reviews from my big SpongeBob review series, put them all together with a central theme, and then elaborate on them and go more in depth than I have in the full season reviews. This time we're going to be talking about every Patchy appearance in seasons 1 through 6. Which is mostly specials, but in one rare case, he just appears in an episode. Now, because I've spoken about a lot of these episodes more than once, I'm only going to talk about the Patchy segments in these episodes, not anything else about the episodes themselves. With that said, let's just start with Patchy's very first appearance. Episode 28, P, the SpongeBob Christmas Special. Patchy tells a tale of SpongeBob's first Christmas while preparing his own house for Christmas. Fun fact, Patchy is played by Tom Kenny. Yes, the voice actor of SpongeBob and Gary. My favorite part, Patchy and Potty in general. Seriously, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the fact that they're trying to parody some kind of low-budget kids' educational show or something like that. But these two are really funny and just really weird. So I have a few theories of how the whole Patchy thing came into being. Maybe they decided to do something live action because Nickelodeon didn't want to pay for them to do 22 minutes of animation. It would save a little bit of money to just throw in some live action segments. Or perhaps they really did want to parody some kind of cheesy, low-budget live-action stuff, maybe in relation to cheesy holiday specials that a lot of live-action sitcoms do. Or perhaps they thought it would be funny to just do this completely random live-action segments out of nowhere, and then came up with the rest of the ideas as they went. Regardless of his inception, I think that Patchy does a wonderful job in this episode. I think what keeps it lively is that he keeps doing different things. He plays with a little sea star and Sponge inside of a sailboat, which is also his hat. He has SpongeBob and Patrick Christmas ornaments. He eats raw cookie dough. He tries to get people to kiss him under the mistletoe. He fights with Potty. He opens fan letters. He does a ton of different things. And they really play up the weirdness of the character. He puts on glasses that have an eye patch on one side, or the fact that he has this pipe that blows bubbles, and the weirdness of Potty, how they're always bickering and how Patchy even cuts off Potty's strings at one point. There's a really good energy to the segments, and it gets bonus points for being completely out of left field when this first appeared. So all in all, I'm very happy with Patchy's segments here. I would say that they're good segments. Episode 33A, Patchy, You Wish. Patchy, I guess he does something. Yeah. Fun fact, there are two versions of the Patchy segment. There is one version that only aired the very first time this episode aired, where Patchy hosts a segment in which kids could vote on the ending of the episode. There was a contest to see if kids wanted SpongeBob, Patrick, or Squidward to get the wish at the end of the episode. It just basically changes the last punchline of the episode, and SpongeBob's won in the US, and the rest of them can be seen in various places and have aired in various places. Honestly, I didn't find any of the punchlines to be really that funny. But either way, that was Patchy's original purpose, to host this call-in voting thing. Since the episode has aired in reruns and on the official Season 2 DVD release, unfortunately, they decide to nix this part in favor of having Patchy... I don't really know why he's there. Why not just remove him from the episode entirely? What they do is they dub over his voice with stuff that doesn't match his lips, like, at all, and it just basically amounts to one or two gags, and Patchy saying, "Here's a cartoon I like!" and rolling the episode. It really doesn't make sense that it's still there. Either leave it in originally, just, without the phone number, or absolutely get rid of it instead of giving us this weird, truncated version. It is worth noting that the original episode in its original form, minus the phone number, is actually on the first 100 episodes DVD, which I really don't want, considering I already have the first 4 seasons, so why would I buy the first 100 episodes? But regardless, that is the only way to see the episode as it originally aired, and as such, since it is commonly seen in this form, I am reviewing the episode as it is, with this weird, bizarre Patchy segments. My favorite part is Patchy in the canon, mostly because there's really not much else to it. So yeah, Patchy is just very strange in this episode, at least in the recut version. I do have to give a little bit of credit because what they actually try to do is kind of impressive. Like, for instance, Patchy reading off the results is now edited so that he's about to read off a fan letter, although that never ends up happening because he gets blown up. It's kind of clever, but it's not really funny, and there is clearly something off and weird and awkward, and not in the good sort of funny way. If you didn't know the context and just were to watch this episode as is, yeah, you can tell there's something just clearly wrong with it. So I'd give the Patchy segments a scumbag, if only because they really don't need to exist here in rerun form. As far as the original segments, from what I can remember, they serve a utility. They're there to introduce the whole voting concept, so I don't really know if I can rank that because, well, it has a utility. It's not something that's supposed to be there, particularly to make you laugh or tell a story or anything like that. It's just there to say, hey, look, you can vote on these episodes. And the concept itself was pretty cool for the time. But yeah, it seems like the only reason Patchy was brought back for this episode from the Christmas one is just because they needed to have someone host and introduce the concept of the voting. And since they already had Patchy and already had the set, they probably figured why not throw him back into the mix. And I guess at that point, the writers just figured, hey, why not throw him into every SpongeBob special? Which brings us to
51p. SpongeBob's house party. Patchy throws a house party. Fun fact, Lux Interior sings Underwater Sun, which is also my favorite part. The Patchy segments are alright, but they're nothing fantastic, definitely not enough to bring up this episode. Underwater Sun is indeed a great song, but everything else in the Patchy segments just seemed like stuff that we've retread before. Patchy and Potty fighting, Patchy getting blown up, yada yada yada, we've seen it before, there's nothing great here.
A large part of it's really awkward as well, from the way Patchy interacts with his guests to the obnoxious song he sings. It's just a little bit on the uncomfortable side. So yeah, overall I would say I'm not a big fan of these Patchy segments. I would give it a meh, but only because of Underwater Sun. Not that the Patchy stuff is really that bad, but this is definitely some of the weaker material.
Episode 54p, SpongeBob BC. Before comedy. Patchy and Potty debate whether the future or the past is the cooler time period. Fun fact, the caveman is played by Bill, the voice of Patrick. My favorite part is, of course, the song, When Worlds Collide. The Patchy segments here are a lot better than the house party ones. They feature a lot of weird effects, a caveman rapping with a robot. It's incredibly strange, but incredibly awesome at the same time.
And the Patchy stuff is definitely the most memorable and the funniest stuff in this episode. After 3 segments of just Patchy and Potty kinda arguing around the house, it was really cool to see it get escalated to this prehistoric setting where Potty's bringing in all this futuristic technology. It provides a pretty cool juxtaposition, and turns their petty squabbles into something a little bit more epic. And I love that bit at the beginning where Patchy's in the dinosaur costume with the fake legs, and he falls over, and 2 members of the crew have to go help him up while a standby sign appears on the screen. There's some really great comedic timing on that. So of course, these are some good segments.
Episode 59p, the lost episode. Patchy hunts down the lost episode of SpongeBob. Fun fact, all of Patchy's SpongeBob stuff has a bow tie instead of a tie. I don't know, maybe he had it made for SpongeBob's house party? Seems strange to me. Anyway, my favorite part is the miners singing. Patchy may not get it, but I do. So, spongy or scummy? Well, So let's start with the Patchy stuff. I really like his segments in this episode. I like the concept of there being a lost episode that he has to hunt down. There's some gags with him on a playground, some gags with him thinking he lost the lost episode. It's probably some of Patchy's finest material.
And I still stand by that. Patchy is in the perfect amount of this episode. His shtick doesn't wear on too long, but he's given enough time to actually do something. And there's even some nice tributes to the show as a whole. There's a montage of a bunch of different SpongeBob moments that happens in the beginning, and it's really nicely edited together. Take note of that, Truth or Square. You can actually put clips in your show and not make it boring or stupid. And there's even a nice ending with the French narrator saying, as long as there are stars in the sky, SpongeBob will be in our hearts and our minds. Although he doesn't quite mention that it will always be on Nickelodeon. Always. Much like with Ugg, I quite like the Patchy segments in this episode more than the actual episode itself. So of course, they're good segments. So after this, Patchy went on a little bit of a hiatus in Season 4. He didn't appear, although there were those weird little intro things at the very beginning saying, "It's a SpongeBob special." And although I do get nostalgic for the character sometimes, looking at it analytically, it's perfectly fine that he wasn't in any of the Season 4 specials. I personally really like Dungeons & Dragons, and everyone else seems to really like Have You Seen This Snail? The show managed to tell 2 stories in complete time without needing Patchy to fill it out. And while I do kind of speculate on what Patchy would have done in those particular episodes, I have to say, yeah, he really wasn't needed. It's also worth mentioning that Patchy didn't appear in the SpongeBob movie for really no reason that makes sense to me. I would be perfectly fine with it if it weren't for the fact that they explicitly have pirates hamming it up. Would it have hurt to have given Patchy at least like a cameo amongst the other pirates, or just in the movie theater or something? Not that it really matters too much, but he is an element of the show, and it does feel weird to have the movie without him making at least a small appearance. So it was nice to see him come back for the very first episode of Season 5. Over on the Patchy side of things, Patchy and Potty decide to get jobs at a burger joint. I like this because it really kind of plays with the Patchy and Potty formula. Rather than having them just be at home hanging out watching SpongeBob, they're actually out doing something in this episode. It's cool to see Potty get a managerial position over Patchy. It's cool to see Patchy struggle with something and go through, I guess, kind of a mini character arc for Patchy. And the thing about all of this is that this is the last time in a very, very long while we're going to see anything good come from Patchy's segments. So enjoy it while you can. It's pretty solid and nice to see Patchy and Potty after their long absence in Season 4. It's nothing groundbreaking or crazy good or anything like that, and it's definitely not my favorite Patchy segments, but it's good nonetheless. There are some weird things about the segments though, like how Potty's costume disappears for a few shots and then comes back. Or the fact that at the end when Patchy's yelling while the gorilla's throwing stuff at him, his lips don't match up to what he's saying, but those are pretty minor complaints. The segments feel a little bit on the rush side, like they could have used a little bit more time to space things out and make some of the montages a little bit longer, but otherwise, they're definitely good segments. SpongeBob versus the Patty Gadget. SpongeBob squares off against a patty cooking machine. Now this is an episode that is really memorable. It has some great rhyming, and what works about it is that it doesn't go on for too long here. It's got a really cool framing device of Patchy telling this tale, and much like Krabs a la mode, the episode has an energy to it. I'm going to be very brief with this one because I've already spoken about this episode twice before. It is great, and Patchy is really what makes it great. Now, some people debate as to whether this actually is Patchy or not, seeing as there's actually nothing listed in the credits, and he does sound slightly different than Patchy, like a little more gravelly, to my ear at least. But they're both pirates, voiced by Tom Kenny, with hooks. Yeah, if it isn't Patchy, it's his long-lost twin brother, Patchy, or something. It was a really unusual choice including him in the show, especially when we already have a French narrator, but I think it works so much better with his cheesy charm added in there. Some of these rhymes would be a little bit weird if they were coming from anywhere else, but from Patchy, I totally buy them. I said in Friend or Foe that was the last good thing Patchy did for a very long time, and when I said that, I really wasn't thinking about this episode, because it is certainly one of his crowning moments of awesome. They're not really segments, so I guess I'll call it a good narration. I'm really starting to stretch it with these rankings. Though that does get me thinking, what if I did a Spongey bits on all of the times the French narrator actually was involved in the story more than just reading off the time cards? That would be a pretty bad idea, actually, and I think you all know that I'm just stalling at this point. The Patchy segments are strange and go on too long, but at least he doesn't sing an awkward song. As I've stated many times, Atlantis SquarePantis is a bloated mess, and the Patchy segments do nothing to help this. If anything, they just drag this out even further. The segments here are longer than any other. He appears 4 times in the episode instead of the usual 3 or 2, thanks to the episode's extended runtime and more commercial breaks. The plot is overly complicated and beyond stupid. Most Patchy episodes are about a very simple conflict or event. Patchy getting ready for Christmas, Patchy and Potty fighting over the future or the past, Patchy hosting a house party. This one is about Patchy getting stuck in traffic and then eventually somehow finding out that Encino is just gone, hallucinating a bit before aliens come and unshrink Encino, which had been shrunk. Just because Patchy segments are supposed to be cheesy and low budget doesn't mean you can just do anything you want with them. I mean, this is just stupid. Like, For instance, there is zero transition between Patchy being stuck in traffic to Patchy winding up in the desert where apparently Encino used to be. There's also 2 random references to The Wizard of Oz. Why? Because this show likes to reference The Wizard of Oz when it seems the least appropriate to. Potty here is also voiced by Paul Tibbitt, who took over the role after Stephen Hillenburg stepped down. And while he does sound a little bit off as Potty, I would have preferred it if Potty was in more of this episode. I think a key to the Patchy segments had always been the conflict between the two, and when Potty hardly appears here, it's just Patchy monologuing to himself. It definitely loses a lot of the charm. And if you don't believe me, the best parts of this special are the parts that Potty appears in. It's kind of funny when he gets a call from Potty and then has to tell the guy in back of him, who is also Paul Tibbitt, that he's talking to his bird, and it's actually funny at the end when Potty isn't unshrunk, and all you hear is brrr, and then suddenly a giant foot comes and squishes Patchy. Everything else is just beyond weird and stupid and not funny. I think the original idea was that the entire thing was just going to be Patchy is stuck in traffic and he wants to get home to watch the new SpongeBob episode. He gets a few calls from Potty, maybe he tries to think of other ways that he could get home faster, complains about the traffic, and then eventually gets home to find he just missed the episode. That sounds like typical Patchy segments. That sounds like something very simple that you can pull a lot of gags from. But I think the problem was there wasn't enough of that for them to stretch it to fill out the entire time of the TV movie. So they needed to add extra segments, which are just Patchy meandering about in the desert, having daydreams, and other really pointless things. And really, the only way it actually ties into the special is that Encino is lost, just like the lost city of Atlantis was lost. That's it. Really, it would have made more sense if Patchy and Potty were on a road trip to maybe try to get to Atlantis themselves and meet SpongeBob, or something like that. So it's about in line with everything else in Atlantis SquarePantis. Overly long, boring, and not funny. Yeah, they're scumbag segments for sure. I guess my only relief is the fact that Patchy doesn't sing in his segments. There is a musical number, but thankfully it's not sung by him or Potty. Oh man. Whew. So, as of this recording, I have not put up the Season 6 video yet. But I have gone very in-depth with my colleague, the mysterious Mr. Enter, over on his channel as to why this special is bad. Particularly the Patchy stuff. The SpongeBob stuff certainly has its problems, but the Patchy stuff is nigh unwatchable. There's a good 15 to 20 minutes of this special that are devoted to Patchy. And mind you, I watched the 51-minute cut, which was what was released on iTunes. There exists an even longer version of that I watched when me and Mr. Enter reviewed it. If that doesn't go to show that they threw in whatever Patchy stuff they could just to inflate the time of the special, just to overhype it, to oversell it, to pretend like the thing was longer than it was, I don't know what will. Because really, all of the Patchy stuff should be cut. Every single last second of this is terrible. I find it strange that they would even go to the trouble of cutting out stuff to make a slightly more condensed version. If you're gonna start editing it, please just release a version without Patchy, or just like very, very truncated Patchy segments. If you don't know, the first half of the Patchy segments is literally just Patchy calling up celebrities that he finds on this stupid Rolodex in Nick's studios and asking them if they want to be on his big 10-year SpongeBob extravaganza. Stupid piratey hijinks ensue. And, might I add, not a single celebrity actually wants to come do the show. The second half of it is Patchy's weird, stupid show, along with him trying to set out and find SpongeBob, and there's a Pink music number in there for some reason, although I'm not gonna complain because it's easily the best part of the Patchy stuff. It is an utter disjointed mess. You could cut out any of the phone calls, and it would still make sense in the show. None of them are necessary. None of them are funny. And the version I saw did cut out the one with the Triumph insult comment dog. Most of the Patchy stuff feels like absolute and terrible improv. It's like they just told Tom Kenny to say some piratey things and then took one take of it. Some of the absolute worst of this is when he's walking with the late Robin Williams. In the version that I watched on iTunes, it was a cut down version where there wasn't as many scenes of him and Robin just randomly walking through back alleys. But even still, there was a lot of bad improv between the two. And I don't blame Robin because he's clearly trying, and so is Tom Kenny, but there's just no material to work with. Oh, and did I mention Patchy sings in this? Thankfully, it's brief, but there's a lot of this that is Patchy up on stage doing an awkward bit, and the joke is supposed to be how bad he is at acting and how bad he is up on stage. But if that sort of joke isn't played very carefully, it just feels like bad acting that's really uncomfortable to watch. As I mentioned with Atlantis SquarePantis, I think a part of the reason why this sucks so hard is because there is no Potty to contrast with Patchy. Potty is only in a very small amount of this episode. I guess it would have been too much work to have the puppet there during all the scenes with him walking through the hallway, and it's very clear they didn't want to put any extra work into this. It goes on way too long. It's not funny at all, and in terms of a story, it just isn't. Like, the first half literally isn't even a story. The second half is Patchy trying to look for SpongeBob, I guess is the story, but even that is incredibly weak and filled with a lot of fillery junk. A big trend that I noticed when just watching the Patchy segments in this episode back to back is that it is incredibly negative. None of the celebrities want to be there or work with Patchy. Like, in story, I'm sure they don't want to be there in real life either, but in story, no one wants to come help out Patchy. They all say they like SpongeBob, but none of them want to come in and help. And Patchy spends the entire thing mopey and depressed because SpongeBob doesn't show up. The entire tone of the thing is pretty negative for a big celebration. I'm trying to think of exactly why this turned out the way it did. I mean, obviously because no one put any effort into it, but maybe there was a specific reason for it. The only thing I can actually think of is that maybe these segments weren't supposed to be in the episode itself. Maybe they were supposed to just be wraparound segments, like they do a lot when they do SpongeBob marathons, or they're going to premiere a big special. They'll have Patchy doing skits and other little things in between the commercials. Maybe this was shot with the intent of just being light commercial fluff, and then at some point it turned into having to be a part of the episode to fill out the time, and stretched out so it had enough commercial breaks to fill the wallets of all the Nick execs. They are definitely scumbag segments, and I see it as a particularly low point in the entire franchise. And that is all of the Patchy segments and all of Patchy's appearances in seasons 1 through 6 reviewed. Though he hasn't made that many appearances as of late, he certainly isn't retired. He still does appear occasionally in the big marathon events. He showed up in a Big Time Rush episode of all things. I still have to see that because I really don't even believe it happened. And he also appeared in It's a SpongeBob Christmas, though it wasn't live action, it was stop motion animation. And although I did review that episode at one point, the version I watched actually didn't have Patchy in it, so I am cautiously excited to get to that point. I have my fingers crossed that because it was stop-motion animation and not live action, the people behind the show actually knew what they were doing when they made it. But if there's one thing I know about the people that make SpongeBob, is that they are not consistent in anything they do. Could be his best appearance, could be his worst appearance, and I won't know until I get there. When used correctly, Patchy can do great things for the series. It's cool to have him introduce a special episode and lead out of a special episode. It gives a little bit more build-up and a little bit more breathing room after the episode is over. It definitely makes the SpongeBob specials feel, well, special. And of course, there's a lot of charm in the way Tom Kenny portrays the role, and in just how low budget and cheesy it is. I think a lot of the problem arises when low budget and cheesy gets confused for, hey, let's just not put effort into this. Because there is a big difference between something that is shot well and intentionally cheesy, and something that the people were just like, well, it doesn't have to look good, so let's not put the extra effort in making sure things work correctly. Let's just do it in one take and say whatever. Despite a horrendous appearance in Truth or Square, and a pretty bad appearance in Atlantis SquarePantis, I still have very fond memories of Patchy and Potty, and those later appearances don't ruin my viewing of the earlier ones. I still think the earlier ones will have their charm no matter what they do to the character later on. Though I think I'd be perfectly okay if they decided to stop using Patchy and Potty. This video was supported by Patreon donator Marvel Disney Fan 99. Thank you very much for donating, and thank you for picking this idea. Pieguyrulz, out.